Beneath the great amphitheater of Rome, in the year 73 before the birth of Christ, a man sat in the dim corner of a stone chamber. The air was heavy with dust and the faint scent of oil from the torches outside. Iron cuffs bound his wrists, rubbing the skin raw with each movement. Above him, the sound of the crowd rolled like distant thunder. Tens of thousands of voices rose and fell with excitement, cheering as athletes and fighters tested their skill in the arena. Through the floor grates, faint traces of the day's contests drifted down, dust, heat, and the restless energy of the spectacle. Around him, others waited in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the quiet broken only by an occasional whisper. His name in Rome was Marcus, though in his homeland of Thrace he had been Cleomenes. Years earlier, Roman legions had carried him far from the mountains of his youth, through lands and seas he had never imagined. Now, he awaited his turn to step into the arena above, armed with a weapon he had scarcely trained to use. Yet on this night, something unexpected happened. In the shadows, a fighter named Spartacus began to speak. His voice was low, but it carried weight. He spoke of boundaries, limits to what even the might of Rome could do. He spoke of laws written long before the present day, preserved in bronze tablets and debated in marble halls, laws that placed certain restraints even on those who claimed absolute authority. Marcus listened, hardly breathing. He had long believed that his life was entirely in the hands of another, that his fate was as fixed as the path of the sun. Yet here was a reminder that the empire itself recognized certain lines that could not be crossed, even for those without freedom. These laws did not speak of equality as we think of it now, but they hinted at the idea that every person, no matter their place, possessed something that could not be entirely taken away. The world Marcus lived in was one where nearly 1/5 of the population was in servitude. The bonds that held them were not only physical, they were tied with laws, traditions, and the machinery of the empire's economy. Rome was a place where markets traded in people, where public life moved to the rhythm of transactions, and where entire households depended on the unseen hands that kept them running. In the homes of the wealthy, those in service prepared meals, kept records, cared for children, maintained order, and ensured the household's smooth operation. Their presence was constant, yet often unnoticed, woven into the very fabric of the city's life. Without their work, Rome's vast empire would have faltered in mere days. Yet even within this system, there were boundaries, lines drawn by Roman law that even the most powerful citizens were expected to respect. For all its severity, Roman law was still law. It applied even to those who believed themselves untouchable. And those who ignored these rules risked heavy consequences, loss of reputation, financial penalties, legal action, or even banishment from the elite circles where influence was everything. One of the most surprising of these boundaries was this: an owner could not take the life of an enslaved person without a lawful reason. This was not an act of compassion, but a principle of property and order. An enslaved person represented significant value, often more than a skilled artisan might earn in a year. Destroying such value without justification was considered wasteful, and waste was deeply frowned upon in Roman society. More importantly, unpredictable actions threatened the stability of the system itself. Order depended on balance. Excessive harshness risked unrest. Too much leniency risked disobedience. Roman law therefore defined specific situations where the removal of an enslaved person from service could be legally justified, such as in cases involving serious offenses, breaches of trust, or threats to safety. These actions had to serve a clear purpose: to uphold discipline, protect property, or maintain public order. This boundary was upheld by both legal structures and the weight of public opinion. In Rome, a person's reputation was a form of currency, and a household known for needless cruelty could quickly lose political allies, business opportunities, and the respect of peers. In some cases, the state could impose legal penalties under laws protecting property or maintaining civic peace. Yet the strongest reason for restraint was economic. Skilled workers, such as educators from Greece, guards from the northern provinces, or chefs from the eastern cities, were valued assets. To lose them without cause was to lose both talent and investment, something Romans sought to avoid. In this way, the value placed on productivity created a kind of indirect protection. While the system did not view enslaved people as citizens, their skills and contributions could make them too important to discard lightly. The second major legal limit concerned religion. In Rome, faith was a public duty, woven into the state's identity. Enslaved people were expected to join in public festivals, honor household deities, and observe the official calendar. Yet Roman law allowed them to continue observing aspects of their native traditions, so long as they did not conflict with the state's authority. This was not motivated by a belief in personal freedom, but by practicality. For many taken far from their homelands, these traditions were a vital source of stability. A person who could quietly maintain certain customs or prayers from their homeland was often more cooperative, more focused, and less likely to lose hope. Roman owners learned that preserving these small allowances often maintained morale and loyalty, making it easier to manage a household or estate. Complete erasure of cultural identity, on the other hand, risked undermining both productivity and stability. A Celtic druid compelled to offer prayers to Jupiter might outwardly comply, yet inwardly feel his spirit fade. A Jewish scribe required to abandon his dietary customs might quietly refuse, choosing self-denial over compromise. A German warrior asked to honor Mars instead of Woden could channel his defiance into a silent, unyielding resistance. To prevent such unrest, Roman law shaped a practical compromise. Enslaved people were expected to join in the public worship of Rome's gods. This was a matter of civic unity and loyalty to the state. They also honored the household gods of their masters, a practice that reinforced domestic harmony. Yet in private, they were permitted to maintain the devotions of their own traditions, preserving the spiritual ties that sustained them. This arrangement led to unusual scenes across the empire. In a single Roman household, a Celtic girl might place a quiet offering for her triple goddess, a Jewish cook might light Sabbath candles in a kitchen corner, a Germanic guard might whisper a prayer to the deity of his homeland before training, and an Egyptian scribe might inscribe protective symbols on scraps of papyrus, all while publicly participating in the master's observances of the Roman pantheon. Masters who ignored this unwritten understanding often faced unintended consequences. Those deprived of all connection to their traditions sometimes became withdrawn, less willing to work, or quietly resistant. Some might even leave their service through desperate means, or carry tales of their treatment back to distant lands, making future campaigns more difficult and costly for Rome. The third limitation was more complex. Masters were discouraged from breaking certain social bonds among those they owned. Roman law acknowledged that even those without citizenship formed deep attachments to spouses, children, and close companions. Destroying these bonds without thought risked unrest. A person with nothing left to lose could become unpredictable, a danger to both household stability and economic interest. For this reason, guidelines emerged to manage the sale or relocation of enslaved individuals in ways that reduced the risk of instability. A skilled craftsman, for instance, might be sold together with his apprentice son, ensuring continuity of training and emotional steadiness. A trusted nurse could be transferred with an assurance that her children remained nearby, preserving the balance of her duties and her peace of mind. These safeguards were far from universal, and in times of war or financial strain, they were often ignored. Yet many understood that preserving such bonds was good business. While marriages between enslaved people had no legal recognition, they held economic value in maintaining morale. Children had no inheritance rights, yet they were seen as future investments best nurtured in a stable setting. Friendships within the enslaved community had no standing in Roman law, but they formed the networks that kept estates running smoothly. The fourth limitation concerned punishment. Roman law allowed owners to discipline enslaved people for serious offenses, to question them during investigations, or to mark them in ways that identified past misconduct. But this was expected to follow rules. Punishment had to serve a clear purpose, maintaining order, deterring wrongdoing, or upholding the law, and it was to be carried out in ways that did not harm the person's ability to work. Severe or needless cruelty was discouraged, both by economic sense and by the judgment of peers. A damaged worker meant financial loss, and a master known for excessive harshness risked both reputation and stability within the household. Romans also understood that unrestrained violence could provoke unpredictable retaliation. Discipline, when used, was meant to be controlled and deliberate. Disorderly punishment was seen as a sign of poor leadership, dangerous for the master, and ultimately destabilizing for the order Rome sought to maintain. Legal codes, later preserved in the Digest of Justinian, outlined such practices in detail, drawing on centuries of precedent. They reflected a careful balance between authority and the need to preserve the productivity and loyalty of those in service. Those in service could still face discipline for breaking household rules, yet such discipline was expected to match the nature of the offense and to serve a clear, corrective purpose. This created a strange moral landscape, not one of kindness, but of regulated severity. A master who disciplined a worker for theft was seen as maintaining order. But a master who punished purely for amusement, without reason or proportion, stepped outside the bounds of accepted conduct, even if no official penalty followed. The difference lay in intent, proportion, and purpose, ideas that offered only limited protection, but marked the first steps toward restraining absolute power. The fifth restraint concerned the use of testimony in Roman courts. Lawmakers understood that those in service might be compelled to repeat whatever their masters told them, creating a serious challenge for justice. If a master could direct every word of their testimony, then the value of such evidence would collapse, and it could become a dangerous weapon in the wrong hands. Roman law responded with complex rules. Testimony from those in bondage could be accepted, but it carried less weight than that of a free citizen. More importantly, they could testify against their own masters only in rare and serious cases, crimes such as treason, murder, or threats to the state itself. Courts enforced this through careful procedures and public scrutiny. Masters suspected of coaching testimony saw their reputations damaged, and future statements from their households were treated with suspicion. Judges developed methods to test for false accounts, questioning witnesses separately and comparing their words for inconsistencies. This rule served several purposes. It prevented masters from using dependent witnesses to frame rivals. It acknowledged that words given under pressure might not be reliable. And it recognized that justice required a degree of independence between a witness and the person they spoke about. Yet the protection was imperfect. While it was difficult for someone to testify against their own master, they could still be compelled to give evidence about others, and faced consequences if their statements were found unconvincing or false. The law shielded against some forms of exploitation while leaving others entirely exposed. The sixth restraint was economic. Masters were discouraged from wasting labor in ways that harmed the broader economy or offended community standards. Though not written into formal law, this expectation was enforced through the invisible but powerful force of social reputation. Roman society was intensely competitive. Wealthy families guarded their public standing as carefully as their fortunes. A master who misused valuable talent, assigning a trained physician to agricultural work, or a skilled scribe to menial labor, risked being seen as unrefined, wasteful, and foolish. Such misuse could lead to social exclusion, the loss of business partnerships, and the quiet refusal of loans or alliances. This constraint mattered most in fields that required skill or education. A Greek tutor of philosophy was too valuable to send into dangerous manual work. A Germanic metalworker, able to craft superior weapons, was an asset worth protecting. A Jewish banker with knowledge of international trade routes could bring prosperity to a household. Their expertise made them indispensable. But this safeguard applied only to those whose talents were recognized and valued. Those without specialized skills, field laborers, basic domestic staff, and untrained workers, enjoyed no such shield. Their well-being depended entirely on the character and decisions of those who controlled their lives. The system gave protection to those considered valuable, yet offered nothing to those whose only strength lay in unskilled labor. The seventh, and perhaps most significant, limitation was this: masters could not lawfully prevent those in service from earning and keeping modest sums through their own efforts. This principle, known as the peculium, formed a parallel economy within the larger structure of Roman servitude. It offered small, but important, opportunities for individuals to improve their circumstances. The peculium was property held with the master's consent, often money earned through extra work, tips from satisfied patrons, or profits from small trade conducted in limited free time. Legally, it still belonged to the master, and could be reclaimed at any moment. Yet in practice, social expectation and practical benefit usually protected these savings. The arrangement served many purposes. It encouraged diligence and loyalty, for good conduct could lead to more chances to earn extra income. It provided a path, narrow, but real, toward purchasing freedom, which in turn reduced the risk of unrest. And it quietly acknowledged that those in bondage were still people, capable of ambition, initiative, and economic contribution. The peculium often deepened the relationship between master and servant beyond simple control. A skilled artisan might use his savings to buy tools that improved his craft, benefiting both himself and the household. A domestic attendant might invest in finer clothing, enhancing both personal dignity and the prestige of the home. An agricultural worker could purchase livestock or implements that made his work more efficient, increasing his overall value. Masters who seized these small savings without cause often faced disapproval from their peers. Many saw such actions as short-sighted, even petty. Worse for the master, those whose efforts were undermined in this way often lost motivation, working with less care and cooperation. The peculium also allowed those who had earned freedom to aid friends and relatives still bound. Freedmen might lend or gift sums to help others secure better conditions or even their liberty. Such acts created networks of mutual support that offered hope for the future and encouraged cooperation in the present. Yet this small allowance was also a subtle instrument of control. By permitting just enough opportunity to inspire hope, it discouraged outright rebellion. A person halfway to buying their freedom was far less likely to risk losing everything in a desperate act. The system allowed movement, but only within carefully drawn boundaries, ensuring that the majority remained where Rome intended them to be. The eighth limitation concerned the youngest in bondage. Roman law regarded children as future assets, and so there was a practical expectation that they should be cared for and protected from harm. Masters who neglected their well-being risked damaging what was, in the eyes of the law, part of their own property. Such neglect was seen not as a moral failing, but as a mark of poor management, wasteful, careless, and unworthy of an elite household. The Romans understood that children raised under constant harshness often grew into adults whose outlook and behavior posed ongoing risks to both safety and productivity. Young ones could not be worked to the same extent as adults, could not be subjected to the same forms of discipline, and required basic care to ensure they reached maturity. These protections were limited. Children in bondage still faced separation from their parents and early preparation for a lifetime of service. Yet practical constraints existed, shaped by both economic interest and cultural expectation. Roman ideals placed strong value on family life and the well-being of children. A household known to mistreat the young, whether freeborn or enslaved, could suffer public criticism. Such reputational harm could affect political alliances, social invitations, and even business arrangements. Masters who failed to provide young ones with adequate care might face economic losses when those children, viewed as future household workers, did not survive to adulthood. The ninth restraint was more complex, touching upon the deeply rooted Roman concepts of honor, propriety, and status. In personal relationships between masters and those they controlled, certain cultural and social limits still applied. While Roman law allowed considerable latitude, public behavior was expected to align with the dignity and discretion befitting a head of household. Conduct that caused public embarrassment, disrupted household harmony, or offended community values could result in social exclusion and the loss of political influence. Acts that disregarded the personal or cultural boundaries of those in service could provoke resistance, disrupt household order, and damage the master's standing among peers. Moreover, some cultural and religious boundaries were widely respected. A master who compelled those under his authority to violate deeply held beliefs, especially those tied to sacred traditions, risked unrest that could grow into larger conflict. Roman society valued discipline and self-control, and a master who appeared unable to govern himself could find his authority questioned in all aspects of life. The 10th and final major limitation concerned the right of appeal. Even those in bondage, under specific and extreme circumstances, could petition higher authorities against mistreatment. This was no easy path. Appeals were dangerous to make, often unsuccessful, and carried serious risk if rejected. Yet the right existed, serving as a final, narrow check on private authority. An individual who could convincingly show that a master had violated legal or social boundaries could seek the judgment of magistrates, governors, or, in rare cases, even the emperor. Success was uncommon, but the very possibility of appeal served as a reminder that, in Rome, even the most powerful were subject, at least in theory, to a higher order of law. The possibility of appeal, though rarely successful, acted as a subtle restraint on a master's actions. It occasionally provided real protection, most often for those whose skills made them valuable or whose mistreatment threatened public order. A Greek philosopher silenced for controversial teachings, a Syrian physician barred from practicing his craft, or a Germanic warrior humiliated in ways that offended cultural norms could sometimes find support among officials who valued their contributions or feared the broader consequences of their abuse. These appeals had a greater chance of success when they involved conduct that clearly clashed with Roman ideals of authority. Romans believed that true leadership required dignity, discipline, and purpose. Masters who appeared cruel without cause, unpredictable, or lacking in self-control not only diminished themselves, but also undermined the entire system of hierarchy upon which the elite depended. Yet the process was risky. Those who appealed unsuccessfully faced severe reprisals. Even when petitions succeeded, the usual outcome was transfer to another household rather than full freedom. The protection was minimal, but it existed, and it acknowledged limits to private power. These 10 boundaries formed a complex web of legal and social expectations that shaped the reality of Roman slavery. None of them offered genuine liberty or full dignity. All were broken at times, often without serious consequence. Yet together, they represented something remarkable in the ancient world, a deliberate attempt to regulate the exercise of near-total authority over other human beings. This revealed the central contradiction in Roman slavery. To Rome, those in bondage had to be property, objects to be bought, sold, and controlled. Yet they also had to be human, thinking, skilled, and capable of contributing to the empire's wealth and stability. This tension could never be fully resolved. Every limit acknowledged humanity, even while denying freedom. Every protection reinforced their status as property, yet restricted how that property could be treated. The system endured because it was both flexible and rigid, harsh enough to maintain order, but measured enough to avoid constant revolt. Yet within those carefully drawn limits lay the seeds of its fragility. For every law that safeguarded the enslaved was, in truth, a safeguard for the master, a recognition that unchecked authority was dangerous not only to the oppressed, but to the structure of power itself. Those who lived in the shadows beneath the amphitheater, listening to Spartacus speak of boundaries and laws, understood this. They saw that power with limits was power already weakened. They knew that authority which must be restrained had already admitted its own instability. When Spartacus and his companions broke free, they carried not only anger, but insight, knowledge of the system's contradictions and of exactly which lines to cross to bring it to crisis. Their rebellion lasted 2 years and sent tremors through the Roman world. Its suppression was meant to send a message to all who might challenge the order, but the message cut both ways. For even in defeat, the uprising proved a truth Rome preferred not to face: no power is truly absolute. Property can resist. Those denied freedom can still choose defiance over submission. The limits that made the system stable also made it vulnerable. The rules meant to protect the masters taught the enslaved where the system could be bent, pressured, or broken. In the end, these constraints were less about justice and more about preserving control, yet by existing at all, they acknowledged a reality that could not be erased: human beings cannot be reduced entirely to objects without risking the collapse of the very order that seeks to control them. Those who lived under this system knew its flaw, and some, like Spartacus, acted upon it. That knowledge, once found, is hard to destroy. The dust of the arena has long since settled, the empire has fallen, and the amphitheater stand in ruin. Yet the lesson remains: power that must recognize its own limits has already revealed its own weakness.